so many that lost their businesses during that time. Susan McCuistion, this is such an awesome day, and just to be able to interview you with this amazing book that you have coming up, we're just delighted. I'm Becky Norwood with Spotlight Publishing, and welcome to our E360 TV Author Spotlight. And today we're celebrating Susan McCuistion. My tongue just went.
It happens a lot with my name. It's okay, Becky.
Susan McCuistion, and her book, The D Word, The 12 Steps to Diversity. Susan, I want to welcome you and celebrate this day with you as we start through the launch process of your book. You've already really in our pre-launch sequence have done very, very well and getting a lot of exposure for your book, and I celebrate that with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm pretty excited about that too.
So you're a cultural practitioner, and you're the creator of Compassionate Diversity, which is, at a time like this is so vital that somebody stands up and leads, and you're doing such a remarkable job in this regard. And when you do this, you integrate the fields of intercultural competence, emotional intelligence, leadership, science, and into the tools that we can have for change. And reading your book, I think what's fascinating to me is that almost all of mankind comes from very diverse backgrounds. We're not all from the same place. We come from everywhere. And the richness of diversity is, I think, what is part of the beauty of life. And yet it's not always looked at it that way. So from your perspective, why did you write this book, and what is your passion in making providing these tools for us to learn a new way, because what's been happening is not working.
Yeah, it's definitely not working. And why did I write the book? I wrote the book because it was important for me to get my word out around compassion. I believe in compassion. The definition of compassion is action to relieve the suffering of another person. And I have a deep held belief, Becky, that we cannot do that effectively without being able to step into that other person's perspective and understand what that person needs. So when I came up with Compassion Diversity, it actually was 3 intersecting circles. I walked around for years with a notebook with 3 intersecting circles, and those 3 intersecting circles were my passion. One was science. My education is in mathematics. I thought I was going to get a PhD in mathematics. I got 8 years of college math. So I love that logical, ordered thinking. I love science. I love the research behind it, the solid nature of it. The other circle was the second circle was actually spirituality. I do believe we are all connected, and you're going to hear that theme come out over and over and over again. And where science and spirituality start to overlap is in the area of quantum physics. And so one of my geeky things to do is actually read quantum physics books for fun. but as we start to look at that interconnectedness and how we affect each other. And so that was the second circle. And then the third circle was culture. So while my degrees are in mathematics, I have been doing this diversity, culture, whatever it is you want to call it, work for over 20 years now. And I have a passion in just wanting to help people get along, to understand each other better. And so those three circles I walked around with for years and years, and I said, if I can ever find what's in the middle of those three circles, that's going to be my life work. And one day, compassion, diversity. Yeah. So that's it.
That's beautiful. And one of the things that on your back cover copy, it talks about we can't fix this stuff in a 2-hour webinar or a speaking engagement, that it's going to take way more time and more practice to do so. And I think COVID in some ways, while it has had its dark side, it also has had an amazing it's brought to our world an amazing time of really coming face to face with a lot of issues. And I think it's good because it's time to bring all these issues to the fore. And you talk a lot about, the way you train is the real talk behind diversity and inclusion and diversity tough love. What is tough love for diversity?
So tough love really came from the longer I do this work and the more I talk to people, you meet somebody new and you say, hey, what do you do? It's kind of, we build our identities and what we do for a living. And I would always say, I do diversity and inclusion work. And people go, oh, like,
what?
Something else. Like, nobody really knows what it is. Or they would start down this path around like EEOC, equal employment opportunity, and numbers and counts and things like that. What I do is completely different. EEOC, that's legal stuff, that's important. We have to keep track of the numbers and the counts. What I do with diversity and inclusion is, just like I said, how do we help people step into different perspectives and understand each other better and build communities, build workplaces where people do feel that they can be themselves, that there's a safe environment, inclusive environment, that they can be themselves. So because people don't really know what diversity and inclusion is, it often gets bent out of shape. And honestly, it doesn't help. Some of the words that we use within the field don't help either, and end up getting turned into like insults. Oh, you're biased, right? And we'll throw that around like that's a big insult. Guess what? We're all biased. Bias is just the way our brains work. Oh, you're privileged. And so what happens is people use these words, they throw them as insults, and then they also get used as triggers for people who don't understand what diversity and inclusion is about. So there's a lot of myths around the work, and diversity tough love is really intended to uncover those myths and help us get to the truth. Shine light on the truth around what is diversity, what is inclusion, who's diverse, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Well, that's fascinating because we see it. I have a family that is incredibly diverse. We're the melting pot. And I think, and I think most of us, if we were to really get to the truth of it, that's the way most of our families are, very diverse and incredibly different. And you see so many different reactions, more from the adults. The kids in the family are they're cool with it. They just, as long as they're loved and, they're happy, except that they also, when they go to school, they're exposed to really some major things that are very different from home. Because, we have a daughter that is, her first husband was a Black gentleman, and then her second husband was Native American. And now she's raising, actually as a single mom, 3 little girls from 2 different marriages, and they all look different. Everything is so
I've got different. That in my family too. Yep.
Yeah. And it, to us, oh my goodness, they're just gorgeous. They're beautiful. We never think about the color aspect or the different cultures and everything else. Even though there is a lot of cultural differences, especially through the adults as they each pass on. And, you know, I've watched the show from Henry Gates Jr., and it's on PBS, and it's Finding Your Roots.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's fascinating to learn the diversity, and most of us have not a clue where we all came from, and what roles we've all played, no matter what nationality we are. We've all come from somewhere else.
Yeah, almost all. Half of my family. When I say I've got that in my family too, right? You wouldn't know looking at me, right? I open with the story in my book, but I'm Native American. That's on my mom's side. You know, it's true. And one of the things I like to put out there, diversity just means difference. And we are all different. And it's important that we focus on this common humanity. And I'm kind of a yes and person. And we do need to recognize these differences. We do need to see color, because when we see color, then we start to recognize that as much as we want the world to be equal and equitable and fair, it's not. And to your point, Becky, I think COVID has really brought that home, because for a number of reasons. Number one, because we all kind of got locked down and cooped up, and then George Floyd was murdered.
Right.
And so this time, even though it's happened over and over again, you know, we can go to Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, we can go back and, you know, we look at it for a moment and then it goes away. When we're all stuck at home, there was no place for it to go. And so what happened was the protests, and those ended up going worldwide. I talked to a colleague of mine, American colleague who now lives in Germany. They attended a Black Lives Matter in his town in Germany. And so it went worldwide, and it did get the attention that it finally needed. And there were so many times as a diversity inclusion professional that I was hoping, you know, please now let this be the time, let this people see this, you know, let us understand each other better. And it would just fade away. And with the killing of George Floyd, there was still that feeling of, oh my gosh, this feels different. And we're here a year later, and I think it still feels different. It feels like we're finally starting to recognize that in order for all lives to matter, because they do, that means that Black Lives Matter. When we look at Native American, the issues of missing and murdered women in Native American communities, right? We have to understand that. We have to understand that, you know, since COVID, the numbers of hate crimes against Asian Americans has gone through the roof, to the point that last week President Biden signed something into place to start to deal with that. And so we do have to see color to recognize these issues. And so
absolutely,
so compassion isn't an excuse. It's harder because when we act with compassion and we work to step into these other perspectives, it means we have to understand these other perspectives.
So in the first chapter of your book, I remember in reading it, you talked about the diversity as a game of optics. What does that mean?
Yeah. So, like I said, my opening story, you know, people can read about it there, but I tell that opening story because from the moment I started doing this work 20 years ago, I was told, you need to get out there as soon as possible that you're Native American, because white people don't have credibility in this work. Now, I identify as both. I definitely grew up in a white middle-class neighborhood, and right, and I've got this other culture too that I'm around. So, you know, this idea that we can't understand it, or that, you know, it's only important because of color. And so what happens is companies, you know, in an effort, we saw a lot of this happen last year, especially again after George Floyd was murdered. You know, companies rush to show the importance of diversity and inclusion, and so they run out and they hire a chief diversity officer. And what they do is they put a person of color into that position. Why? Because that person is diverse. Okay. And again, we go back to the diversity myths. Who's diverse? Well, we all are. Diversity is just difference. But that person is diverse. And here's the thing, like this, again, the double-edged sword, that person very likely is qualified for other roles of leadership within the organization. Right. And so that's part of the systemic stuff. They've not been recognized for those roles before, but now all of a sudden, because we've got this chief diversity officer position, they're considered, like the optics of it. Here's this person, we're going to stick them in this role. And so, they're qualified for these other positions that they've not been able to get into. Now they're stuck into this role, and, they know it too. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm in this role, and I hear this over and over again from colleagues like on LinkedIn, they do similar rants of like, we're qualified for more and yet we're stuck into these roles. And so it becomes this game of optics. So what's happened is we overcorrect based on color and gender, and we tend to kind of miss out on these other pieces of diversity. So like, our ability, the generations that we come from, our veteran status, sexual orientation, all of those things that also help us create diversity. We overcorrect based on those two things because of visuals, and we undercorrect in these other places. And frankly, Becky, in the diversity and inclusion field, if we're going to expect others to be better, we need to be better.
Absolutely. Right. And we see that all the time. It's, and there can't be, I don't know, the name calling, the name calling, and there can't be the finger pointing. That has to stop. That just simply has to stop.
It's got to stop. We've got to stop.
And it's from all sides. It's not, it's just not just one nationality of people. It's from every avenue.
Yes, it is. And that's where I look at things more holistically, because it is all of this. You can look at both ends of the political spectrum. Both ends are just as guilty. Every side, every gender, every race, we can fill in all of this. It is everybody who has this tendency to do this finger pointing and go out and forget that when there's one here, right, there's three more. There's a whole more back, right? So, so this idea about, diverse candidates, what happens when we're afraid to start to name, we have to name our problems in order to fix them, right? And so when we say, we want diverse candidates, well, what does that mean? What's it mean? It doesn't mean anything. And the thing is, when you say we want diverse, that instantly applies that some people are diverse and other people aren't. And in that instant, we have created in groups and out groups the exact thing that we're trying to resolve within this field.
Well, I think that it's deeply embedded in for generations, where there's that difference. It's always that we can't be just flesh and blood human beings that bleed the same color, that all of this, it's deeply embedded from generation to generation. And yet it's come to a point where it's time where the hate, the disconnection, the discrimination, it's time for change. It's time to bring that. So how do these things harm us?
So the hate and the disconnection, again, we get back to, we have to look at this from a holistic perspective. So when something happens, we immediately and rightfully go to the aid of the victim of these things. Victims of hate and discrimination are subject to higher rates of depression, hypertension, certain cancers. In addition to the violence has been perpetrated against them, right? So that's that. Now, when we move to the perpetrators, in counties where whites express high levels of bias, well, both express and unexpressed, so implicit and expressed bias, both blacks and whites have higher rates of circulatory diseases. And this disconnection, when we have this disconnection, people are less likely to trust and bond with each other. And this social disconnectedness actually is more detrimental to our health than things like smoking, obesity, and high blood pressure. So that's just two of the groups. That's the victims and the perpetrators. And then ultimately, we also have everybody else who's observing this. And so the observers, we've got these things in our brain. It's a special class of neurons. They're called mirror neurons. So Becky, have you ever, when you're watching somebody and they stub their toe and you go,
yeah,
right? That's the mirror neurons working. It's the mirror neurons act as if when we're watching something, they're responding as if that's happening to us, right? So when you see somebody flip their, hurt their toe and you go, that's the mirror neurons. Okay. Yeah. So when we're watching these acts, when we're watching videotapes of people being, beaten and murdered, our brain is registering all of that for us as well. And so we get just as the cortisol enters our system and all of those stress hormones enter our system also. So,
it's almost like the fight or flight type of a reaction to that.
Yeah. So we do need to understand that this stuff isn't good for any of us, because of all of these things. We know it's not good for our health. Anytime something stressful happens, this flood of cortisol comes in, and that just isn't good for us. Cortisol and something like 1,200 other chemicals and neural responses and all that, and all of that just creates stress on our systems and makes us very unhealthy people.
Well, I find the comparisons, because oftentimes we don't associate health issues with emotional issues that come from what we're facing in society. Yeah. And there is that interconnection. Every fiber of who we are is connected in some way. And health issues, if you've come from a past where there was a lot of abuse, where you have certain issues that you just constantly face, even with your health, until you get down to the bottom of it, until you face what's gone on. And a lot of times there's a way to heal once you've actually taken a close look at what that really means.
Well, and that's so true. And actually, this is even more fascinating. I didn't even write about this one in my book, but I have written about it on my blog. Trauma. So again, understanding the history, understanding where this comes from is very important, because generational trauma is real and it shows up in our DNA.
It does.
So
yeah.
It's not
very deeply embedded.
Yeah. It's not just this lifetime. It's the generations that we have lived through and what we have, our families and our ancestors have gone through before this.
Pretty fascinating. Yeah. For those that are listening, this is the book launch time for Susan, and you can right now find her book on Amazon if you type in her name. And I also have a banner that I can show that will be a direct link. Here it is, and to her book. This is a time for really introspection and a deep consideration into how to make the changes for a more inclusive environment, what that looks like. And I'd like to go into that conversation, but I want to take a short break, give you a chance to have a glass of water. I've had you talking, so I want to make sure you stay hydrated. We'll take a short break and we'll come back to the conversation on what changes that we can implement to make a more inclusive environment for mankind.
Okay.
All right. Very good. we're back together for this next segment of our show about how to make more inclusive environments and how to begin those paths of change, because it is definitely the time, and I think that there's more and more of us becoming aware that this just simply isn't working. Let's make some changes here. And how do we go about that, Susan? And I guess it's kind of a double question in the sense of how is your work and your approach to it so different from what others are doing in this field?
Well,
that was a big bunch of questions.
I was going to say that's a bunch of questions. So let me unpeel it. Let me start with, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. And you had mentioned, we can't fix this in 2 hours. I think at the pace that our work goes, we want solution, we want resolution so quickly, and creating inclusive environments is one of those things. It's deep, like we've already talked. There's a lot of stuff underneath that. This is not, a 2 hour, a 2 hour webinar. We see companies, we're closing for the day for unconscious bias training, as if that's something that we can fix. I mean, we're all biased. It's the way our brains work. And it takes more than, a day of learning about it. And really, if you do that and then you don't pay any more attention to it, and you don't make any changes in your system, you've just honestly kind of wasted everybody's day and lost a day of revenue. So you might as well dig in and recognize that this is organizational change. I have to say, that's why I was so happy this weekend on the pre-launch when I saw my book coming up on the organizational change list. I'm like, yes, because we have to understand, right? This isn't it isn't a brief fix, and it is something that takes time. It's also finding some grace, allowing ourselves and others the opportunity to make mistakes. I had an executive once, I was talking to him, and we're doing a coaching session. He said, Susan, I learned most of what I learned about this stuff by stepping in it. Mm-hmm. And I said, welcome to the club, because that's how we learn. For those of you with kids, you can tell the child, don't touch the stove. It's hot, don't touch it. But they don't know what it's hot means until they touch the stove. That's right. They touch the stove and they burn themselves. And then I bet they're pretty careful to not touch the stove anymore, right?
Like, that does not feel good.
Yeah, and we're so quick to rush in and condemn rather than, taking a step back and looking at things as a learning opportunity. Now, I also want to be clear. There are things we need to condemn, right? I look at things from, yes and, both and, not either or. Things are very rarely either or. There's a lot of yes and, both and. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is, we do rush, companies, we want to make a statement because this person did X that got out into social media. And that's part of the world right now, right? Somebody does something wrong and we're out on social media and blam, cancel culture's in there and that's it. But taking a step back and recognizing we're human and learning the skill of discernment that, sometimes people say things that are hateful and deserve to be blasted. And sometimes people say things that are just flat out ignorant. And I mean ignorant just by the very definition of the word. They just don't know. And so to blast them for not knowing, are they ever going to go near that discussion again?
No, they stay far away from it because it's men that hurt.
That's right.
From it. Yeah.
That's right. And so, from my approach, number one, it's different because that holistic view, recognizing that there are different facets of this that we've all got to fix. We've all got to work on. We are all in it together and in different ways. And how do we understand these different pieces and fix it there? So there's that. Number two, it's the developmental point of view. I think I say in my introduction, we just have to understand that there are some people that just aren't ready to talk about the idea of privilege, and that's okay. We're all in different places. When I talk about my math background, there's folks who are in algebra Or there's folks in basic math, and that's okay. They go through their life just knowing basic math. That's fine. And then to be an engineer, you've got to go through basic math, algebra, trig calculus, differential equations, right? Right, you got to know all that stuff. And that's to be an engineer, a specialist. But we can at least kind of, move each other and help each other along in that. And so understanding that there are people who may never be in a space to be able to say something like Black Lives Matter. They conceptually don't have the experience or the learning to understand what that idea is getting at. The idea that right now, the way the system is set up, they don't, right? And so how do we get focused? That's why we need that common humanity, right? To focus on that. So that developmental piece, understanding people are in different spaces and ready for different conversations at different times. And then third, the compassion piece. Compassion, resilience, and where we focus our attention. So resilience, the ability to bounce back. This is another thing I've heard some things about. Like sometimes I'll see out on LinkedIn somebody, these people need to be more resilient than those people, and don't talk to us about resilience. Whoa. Like, again, you're making a whole lot of assumptions about somebody else's life that you don't know what they've had to bounce back from. So this idea of compassion, really being able to help others in the way that they need to be helped, not in the way we think they need to be helped.
Right. Absolutely.
Resilience to bounce back from some of these challenges that we have, and then also where we focus, what we stand for. Right now, we spend a lot of time fighting against injustice, fighting against discrimination. Well, when you fight and you fight and you fight and you're focused on fighting, what are you going to do? You're going to fight some more, and you're going to be really angry.
And attract more of the same.
And so this slight shift doesn't mean that we don't understand there's a discrimination problem, doesn't mean we don't understand there's an equity problems, but a slight shift. Instead of fighting against discrimination, standing for justice. Instead of fighting against inequity, stand for inequity. Instead of fighting against hate, stand for love.
I always think of the quote that you never know what a person has gone through, so always be kind.
Yeah.
And that goes so deep, because you wonder sometimes why a person reacts in a certain way. Typically, it's something deep in their core of something terrible that they went through, and it's simply time to have the love and compassion and the all that goes with that, to not be judgmental, but say, okay, there must have been something that's caused this.
Yeah, you can't solve a problem by focusing on the problem. You have to focus on the solution. You have to understand the problem, and you have to focus on the solution. So that stand for, just that slight shift is a really important part of my work as well. And in the end, it really is all about connection. First, kind of connecting our brain and our heart, and then out from there, connecting with others. So we've got to connect ourselves first, within ourselves first, before we can expect to really make authentic and true connections with others.
And so how do we do that within ourselves?
So that's actually through the resilience. And so there's an organization that I've worked with and I'm certified in, called Heart Math. They're out in Northern California, and they teach the science of this connection right here between the brain and the heart, and also the energetics of it, because really we are just energy bundles. And actually, some of the interesting research that they've done, if you put your hands out, like this, your energy field goes out that far. So if you're sitting next to somebody, you're in each other's energy fields, and you will affect each other based on the way that you're feeling and your moods. And so Heart Math has done some really interesting research around that, and they have some great techniques for reconnecting here and feeling that love and that compassion. There's actually more information that goes from your heart to your brain than the other way around. And so when we can connect this and work from our heart, that changes everything around.
Very fascinating. I had an author, she had her book launch about 3 weeks ago, and she had gone through incredible abuse from her father. growing up, and she used heart math. She speaks about it a lot in her book, about how heart math was one of those tools and resources that she used to transform her own self. And she's vibrant. She's just amazing in what she brings to the world now. But she said she talked about her journey, and it was not a fun journey.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of anger that was bottled up inside her until she finally discovered a new way to really face these issues.
Yeah. It is so important, that heart connection and heart math. Boy, I need to find out more about her, because I have similar background, right? But it is that connection and how we affect each other. So it is building this connection here first.
Awesome. So in the 12 steps of diversity, can you name them kind of one by one, and just kind of in a...
Oh gosh, I didn't bring my list. I don't know. You know what else I realized, Becky? I didn't bring my book.
It's in the book. It's in the book.
Yeah, so I probably can get pretty close. So I want to say diversity recovery. There's a reason I've used that addiction analogy, and that is because I do think, as diversity inclusion professionals, we're addicted to the way things are being done. Again, that anger comes out. We get addicted to the cortisol and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, not much has changed. I talked about some of the hate crimes going on, some of the other issues going on. Boardrooms don't look any different, and yet somehow in the field we're committed to continuing to push the same thing over and over when it hasn't worked. And so I think that's that addiction analogy, and that's why it's the 12 steps to diversity recovery. But the first step really is about us versus them, right? This idea, that's one of the myths, that we are all in this together. We are all connected. Also that we're all connected is another one. Third, that we're all diverse. And that I also have to understand myself and my diversity before I go out and understand other diversity. Not before, I think along with, certainly.
Right.
One of the other ones I talk about is diversity is not a zero-sum game. That's another one of those myths. Often we think about, if this group gets something, then my group loses something. That comes from a limited mindset and also power dynamics. And that's one of those myths that's out there. Diversity actually is win-win. We do know when things improve, again, it's that bring everybody up. When things improve for one group, they eventually improve for another group. So that, I think, gets us to 5, because the first 5 really deal with the myths. Right. The next 7 now start to deal with the skills. So the first skill is the awareness. And so most in the book, what I focus on with regard to awareness is the self-awareness, but there's also the mindfulness and the other awareness that I briefly address as well, but is an important part of awareness. Second step is authenticity. Seventh step is authenticity. Authenticity, this is really about understanding each other, that being authentic doesn't mean acting the same in every situation. And just because we are different, it's about different situations doesn't mean we're not authentic. It's about understanding the context of different situations. 8th step deals with vulnerability. How do we be vulnerable? Maybe admit our mistakes when we're wrong. Admit that there's still things that we have to learn. Open-mindedness, I believe, is the next one. Right. So
I actually brought up your manuscript.
Am I good so far?
I'm doing well.
Open-mindedness, how do we ask questions? Oh, Becky, that was interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Right. Developing this idea that we don't know everything and making it okay to ask questions. Next is emotional intelligence. And so that idea of, connecting, because when we're feeling good, it means things are going according to our beliefs, values, and expectations. And when we're not, it means things aren't. It's pretty easy. So how do we use our emotions to guide us to help that discernment piece, right, that I talked about earlier? 11 deals with letting go. So letting go means we have to let go of preconceived ideas, preconceived emotions. It also means forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big, big part of step 11. And then ultimately step 12 is really just continuous learning. Like keep doing it over and over. This isn't the thing you do once. You don't just read my, 140 pages and say, I'm done. Right?
No, it's a lifelong journey, isn't it?
It's a lifelong journey indeed. So I think I did them all. I might have smushed some of.
There might have been a few that were blended together, but one of the things in this step 11 is that we grant ourselves and others the grace when they mess up, and when we mess up. And I think that is, I think each of us, many of us, are much harder on ourselves than on others. And yet at the same time, when these things arise, is not holding the grudge, not holding it over the head, and also loving yourself enough to forgive yourself and continue to grow. And I think those are some of the that heart math, the things that really, really need to be brought to the fore. So in your work, how do you work? Do you go into organizations? What do you do as far as getting this message out to the world?
Yeah. So I do go into organizations. I like to work with leadership teams. Right now, I'm working with a large global organization. As a matter of fact, I had a couple sessions, individual sessions this morning. One of my favorite things about my work is I do get to work globally. I talked to somebody in Rome and then somebody in Warsaw this morning. So that was great.
Awesome.
Their global leadership team, so I've already kind of been over in Europe today and I'm back here. The beauty
of Zoom and all these other things.
Exactly. Working with leadership teams, helping them understand their approach to cultural commonalities and differences, might be, some one-on-one coaching, might be, some larger group sessions, certainly. I think when you open, you said it's not just, listening to some, speech or this or that, but at least the speaking kind of gets, juices flowing and people thinking a little bit differently. So, I enjoy doing the speaking as well.
So I noticed on your manuscript, because I have not got, the book hasn't come in yet, so I haven't got it in my fingertips.
I said that too, Becky. I got to remember to take a copy out of the studio.
When you have these interviews, you got to open it up, hold it up. So in step 1, each chapter you go into a little more depth as far as what each of these things mean. But I really like the way you had the book laid out in the way that really put the points across in a where you can catch, changing the font into italic for some of your quotes and different things, which really brought up, like for step 1, it says, we acknowledge that separating people into groups of us and them is not only physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually harmful for everyone, it's also detrimental to our personal relationships. And how incredibly true that is, and what that means, because if we expect a difference in the world, we have to be the change. We really need to step into that role of making the change and doing the change and being the change. And yes, it's a process. There's no pointing fingers. And then the next step that you talked about quite extensively is step 2, is recognizing we are all connected. And we are all part of different societies, nations, and world, and we're all human, but we still have the same basic needs for belonging. And so that in itself is what creates the diversity that you've talked about. So to me, this book has been fabulous to really bring these issues to the core, and the strength that you show in being able to stand up and talk about this and really, really bring it to fore. And there's one of the things that I have noticed, and I've talked about extensively when I speak, is about being an impactful influencer in our world and how to do that. And this is what you are doing. Your influence by standing up and not being afraid to bring up an issue that is, wow, very, very near and dear to so many of our hearts. But a lot of us would rather not talk about it. We just kind of keep our mouth shut.
Yeah.
Mouth shut, not our mouths shut.
Yeah. Well, we can't. Yeah, we can't do that anymore. And I think that's that when we talk about, dare I bring up one of those words, privilege? We've all got different privileges. It's just when we think about when we're in the majority population, it's a privilege not to be able to talk about these things. Why? Because they don't affect us.
Right. Right.
And so how do we use the thing about privilege? Again, we've all got different, maybe socioeconomic, it may be most often now used in terms of race, it may be gender. I tell you what, I use my woman privilege. I haven't traveled in a long time, but my woman privilege, I love when a man will pick up my bag and put it in the overhead.
I do too.
I use that for sure, right? But these different privilege are able bodies. If you're able bodied, you have a privilege being able bodied. And so recognizing that we do, and how do we use our privileges to help other people? And so, part of being white in the United States is understanding that we do have the privilege of not having to talk about some of these things because they don't affect us. And how do we start talking about it? Because it is important for all of us, for all of these reasons that I mentioned.
Very true. And the other point in chapter 3, you talk about there are many ways to be right.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that we have so much in common, we really do.
Yeah.
And sharing our values and allowing ourselves to actually see the difference and discover different ways that we can express those differences.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the examples, I think I use it in a later chapter, but it might even come up in here. I think I kind of allude to it here. This idea of we share values. That's what we want to focus on the commonality. We share values. Everybody wants to be respected. Everybody wants to be loved. We all want to be successful in the things that we do. It's the behavior around those things that's different. And the thing is, it's the behavior that we see. So that's what we judge. So quickly, look at me when I'm talking to you. Were you brought up that way, Becky? Look at me when I'm talking to you.
Oh, yes, I was. For sure. And I think as a mom, I pretty much said, look at me when I'm talking to you.
Right? It shows respect. It shows I'm listening to you, right? That's the idea of look at me when I'm talking to you. Well, there are cultures where look away is respect. And so now if we're brought up in a culture where look at me when I'm talking to you and this person's looking away, and this is what I mean by the emotional intelligence too, right? What happens? We get frustrated. Why are we getting frustrated? Because something's not going according to our expectations. Mm-hmm. When perhaps they were just taught look away was respectful. And this is the thing. We need to connect on those values. We all want to be respected and understand that two completely different behaviors could be a reflection of the same value.
And it means the same respect as well.
Exactly.
And you've talked about having conversations in chapter 4. You talk about that a lot. Yeah. And accepting that we can't really resolve differences by pointing fingers and placing blame, but in having those conversations where you, instead of saying, oh, well, you do this, you do that. Well, why? Why do they do that? And having the conversation around it. So then you have more empathy, more ability to say, well, that's the way they were raised. That's their culture. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And if you get an understanding of that, I read a Facebook comment from a young man that I've known for a number of years. And he had just lost his aunt, and he was giving her a tribute. And his aunt had grown up very, very abused by one of her, by her uncle, and how he talked about how much he learned from her, but she had never said. She just passed away, and just before she passed away was the first time he knew about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he talked about, having been raised by his aunt for a period of time, but now and understanding why she was the way that she was and what she had undergone, it changed everything for him. And he now was looking at her with a deep inner respect, because the way she reacted to life and the strictness with which she raised him and his brother and all the other things that came to the forefront, there was deep-seated reasons, and how as to how that she really chose to live her life, and she wouldn't take guff off of anybody, but because she had to take so much off and when she was a child.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most difficult things we have to realize. What other people do is because of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's got nothing to do with us.
Right.
What we've done is we've triggered something in them and their response. What they do is because of them. And that goes back to the holistic thing. What the perpetrators do is because of them. Right? And that's why we've got to look at what made that kind of behavior okay.
Right.
Because it's not. Right. No. And so that's why we got to get into this. And I have to say, I have a friend, and I have this in the book too, and I'm really excited because I'm finally, after almost 2 years of this stuff, going to see him this weekend, who said to me, Susan, you're at the same time the easiest and the most difficult person to talk to. Easy because I can say anything. Difficult because I know you're always going to give me another perspective to think about. And that's really what it's about. How do we balance this and recognize it's not just my side of the story? There's the story, your side. There's the people watching us. We're not unaffected by any event, even that we observe. Anything that we learn, we can't unlearn it. We can ignore it, but we can't unlearn it, right? And so, in this, homage to his aunt, it was for him an enlightening moment of recognition of what she did was because of who she was, and how that blessing of that made him who he was, right?
Very, very true. And really, truly, what is normal?
Yeah, how about that one in the book too? There's no such thing as normal. We've all got our idea of what normal is, but it's normal to us. It's not normal.
I always chuckle. I said, well, maybe I'm just kind of really abnormal because I don't know.
That could be
too. And then you talk about in chapter 5 about the win-win proposition and really finding ways to get that common ground. In really connecting in a different level, and just understanding through the process of your 12 steps of having the conversation, and then what's the solution to that conversation, and it's not something that's going to be cured overnight, but it is certainly something that we can all create the awareness for and be completely aware of.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is kind of backing off and recognizing that can't convince other people. I think we spend so much time fighting and trying to convince other people of our perspective, but the reality is I don't know that anybody can really convince anybody of anything else. You can have a conversation about it and you can come to an agreement, but how do we find that space?
But we lead by example, and the question is, are you who you say you are?
Yeah.
And that's what you talk about a lot in chapter 7 is, are you truly who you say you are? And really, when we look at it that way, you have to go deep. Sometimes you can say, well, I don't like the way that person, what they're doing. I don't believe in that, but really also looking at ourselves, do we lead by example as well?
Yeah. Exactly. And again, it's that connection to the values, but also recognizing that somebody may behave different somebody else may behave differently around that same value. And that's right. That's the connection, that are you who you say you are, is the connection to the value.
Right.
More than the behavior.
Right. And the vulnerability to have the humility to say, well, I didn't react very well, or however, when we're in a situation that maybe we have some deep-seated feelings about as well.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
This is a beautiful conversation, and it's kind of exciting to see you doing the work that you are, and really a celebration, because I think more and more of us are becoming aware of the time for change.
Mhm.
And I think the universe is pretty amazing in the sense that there's been a lot to bring this to the fore for us now.
Yeah.
And there's been so much that is creating the awareness, but each one of us on an individual level has a responsibility.
That's right.
And if we continue on with the finger pointing, and we continue on with all of that kind of very narrow viewpoint of it, it's not going to get better. It will continue to be just as it has been for generations after generation.
Indeed.
And yet that brings us to the responsibility of standing up and really, even as you do, is get out there and speak and talk. But if you're a parent, teach our children a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
Teach our grandchildren a different way of thinking and viewing the diversity that we are all faced with. And the more we begin to stand up and do that, the more the change is going to make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree, Becky.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We could go on and on and on.
Yes, I could.
And actually, it's really kind of an exciting conversation. And your book is exquisitely wonderful. You really nail it down into something where we can go deep, and we know that it's a process. It's not going to happen just like, okay, I'm going to change my mind, but realize the interconnectedness, not only with every human being that lives on the face of the earth, but the interconnectedness within the mind, body, and spirit. That if we're having health issues, it's usually a deeper core of what's going on. And so really recognizing that and stepping into that and appreciating it, and then lead by example.
Yeah, exactly.
So for those that are, for Susan, what would you say to somebody that maybe is just coming across your book, and what's your biggest hope for readers?
Oh gosh, this morning I woke up. It's been busy. I've been working all weekend. I have my list. Like, I have a list every day of what needs to get done for this launch. And I got up this morning and I looked at, my goals. I have them written up on my wall when I accomplish this. And really the biggest one, my intro, I am in the end just really like a next generation flower child. And I really just want everybody to get along. I want people to understand each other. I want love to prevail in the world. And it goes back to why I wrote this book. I want us to understand our connection to ourselves and to each other, and how we understand each other better, because when we do that, it's better for everybody. It's better for our families. It's better for our communities. It's better for our workplaces. Our workplaces become more productive and more innovative, and we and more successful, more financially successful, and even beyond. So, for me, it really is all about that connection and how to understand each other. And that's what I really want people to, I really want to do. I just really want to help people understand each other better.
Well, kudos to you, and thank you for the work you bring to the world. And this is at the end of our broadcast. We have an hour, and we're like 15 seconds away. Thank you. And be sure and pick up a copy of Susan's book. We'll be back on Wednesday to really do another showcase and a big celebration. And thank you, Susan. You're very amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.